Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new Securing Bridges podcast. You're about to join Alyssa Miller as she sits down with senior and executive security leaders to share stories of success and failure while working across business teams. It's time to build and secure the bridge to the business. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hey, Securing Bridges faithful, we're back. It's another episode 24 of Securing Bridges. We are right here with another live stream coming your way. We're digging into what we do every time. We are talking about how do we secure the bridge between us as security professionals and the rest of the business or the rest of the world, the rest of that community around us, those that we serve. How do we connect that security message and help those people who don't eat, sleep, and breathe this every day understand the world of cybersecurity and how they can be more secure in this digital world? So we've had 23 amazing guests, one after the next, and 24 is going to be so cool. I'm actually really excited about this. A little bit of a serendipitous way that this episode came about today, but it's one I've been thinking about for a while. And we're going to dig into the whole idea of like embedded systems. I mean, how many of us drive around in cars or motorcycles or fly in airplanes and never really think about the cybersecurity implications of some of the systems? Well, we're digging into that today because with us today, we have an amazing guest. It's Derrick, or as you may know him from Twitter, or if you're with us on Fancy Fridays, you know him as Can Bust Dutch. Hey, Dutch, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing all right.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. First of all, I'm again, I can't say enough of how excited I am for this episode. But let's kick it off just by, why don't you, like we do with every guest, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, so about half a decade or so, I actually made a huge career pivot from corporate IT into vehicle security. I did it for about 2 to 3 years as a hobbyist. And about 2 years ago, I took up a job in the field and relocated to Motor City to start out my career in vehicle security. And, it's just continued to grow from there with, I never would have imagined when I first looked into trying to hack my motorcycle that I'd be on a podcast here today. But it's been nothing but fun and, nothing but growth ever since.
So first of all, I love that. And I'm pumping my fist because it's like so many of us, I think, in this industry kind of started that way. I mean, certainly at age 12, when I was breaking into Prodigy, I definitely did not think someday this was going to be a career for me. But, here we are. It's a career for you. It's a career for me. But so let's kind of dig in. So the name, Can Bust Dutch. Now, people who kind of have gotten into vehicle security in any way, shape, or form. Maybe they've gone to the, car hacking village at one of our friendly hacker conferences or something, may understand that. But can you kind of just start with helping people understand what is this CAN bus, right? I mean, because I don't know that everyone really has a good picture of what CAN bus really means.
Yeah. So usually the analogy I use when explaining it to people is if, a lot of non-technical people may have seen the acronyms LAN or WAN, a local area network and a wide area network. CAN is actually just that, an acronym, and it stands for Controller Area Network. So it's a network between microcontrollers and allows them to communicate with each other. And, microcontrollers, with the growth of IoT, has, expanded substantially. You see CAN bus not only in vehicles, cars, motorcycles, aircrafts, as we mentioned, but you actually also see them in industrial control systems. So that automation systems can communicate with each other and know what they're doing in the assembly line. Or, I worked a while for a food and beverage automation company, and they actually had CAN bus on their hardware.
Okay. And I mean, near and dear to my heart, two of the ones you mentioned, well, one you mentioned, I'll mention, obviously aircraft, for those who don't know that I'm a student pilot at this point. And so very relieved to know that my poor 1968 Piper Cherokee does not have any microcontrollers or CAN bus. So I guess, from that perspective, we'll get into there's already a question we'll get to in a minute about that. But, the other one that has come up here in Wisconsin, because I don't know if they're officially Wisconsin based anymore or what, but they've got a big plant here, is farm equipment, and John Deere in particular. So there's been a lot of talk too about how, right to repair and how the use of these controllers has kind of impacted that. And so it's interesting the way you describe that. This is actually in a lot of different types of equipment and not necessarily just vehicles.
Yeah. I actually recently was in talks with a potential career in farm equipment security. And I do know that I think in 2021, it was their first appearance of we actually had like a farm hacking village at DEF CON. And honestly, I did not know about this until I went to CES in 2021 and John Deere was there. And I was like, that's kind of weird. What's John Deere doing here? And I went in. And the technology they have is crazy. They have, I don't know if it's considered AI or algorithmic based, but they have camera systems that, look at the crops and they will put insecticide accordingly, so that, instead of using an aircraft and crop dusting the whole plot of land and overusing, and having a whole bunch of costs associated, they're able to, only do the insecticide where it's needed now. And kind of ag is one of the last places we really expect technology to hit.
Right? Yeah. I mean, you think of the farms. I mean, I live like a mile from farmland, right? And you think of farms and you think of, just old school folk out there with their tractors and, maybe their harvesters and things like that. But you don't realize just how far that's come. Sure. If I think about like an airliner, I can think about how complex that all those systems are. And we hear about it all the time, all the safety systems and everything else that get built into that. I don't think people, until like this started on the scene, and I mean, for me personally, until I started looking, I didn't realize just how incredibly technologically enabled farming has become. And so I know you've done like work in motorcycles in particular. I'm kind of curious there too. What do you see in terms of just like some of the enablement? Where's technology taking us with motorcycles that maybe people don't recognize either?
Yeah. Well, one thing that's kind of interesting is motorcycles usually fall a little bit behind cars in technology. It's weird because, motorcycles are such a performance-driven vehicle. You would think that they would kind of be leading the pack, but they often, companies like Honda and Yamaha and stuff like that, they often come as kind of an afterthought. That probably has a lot to do with them being considered recreational vehicles. Like we need to make sure we focus on the important vehicles first, and then we'll focus on our recreational line. I don't know, like, there's, I I think one of the most helpful things with motorcycles, aside from the very intelligent ABS and traction control systems that have came to be over the years, is probably also the adaptive suspension. There's under hard braking and stuff like that, your recoil and rebound and stuff is different. And it's crazy, it goes from motorcycles at one point having, I think in 2003, the first motorcycle to come out to have a controller area network was the Ducati 749. And most people don't even consider it like the first one to have it, because all it had was the dash, the engine controller, and then I think an alarm system. It only had 3 things on it. And now, you look at a motorcycle and it will have anywhere from 5 to 10 controllers on it for ABS, traction control, the adaptive suspension, the engine controller, the dash, and it might even have its own controller for the accelerometer and the tilt sensor and stuff like that. Like kind of bikes like BMWs and Honda Goldwings have full-blown body controllers sometimes to manage their their heated seats and their sound system and everything like that.
Which is, even this is incredible to me. And, so I used to own a Harley. I had a 2001 Dyna Super Glide. And it was cool. But again, there was nothing like all of this. It didn't have ABS. Definitely did not have it. It was cool because I could manually set a lot of the suspension components, with combinations of air and oil and all that kind of craziness. It was great. But to think about computers doing that real time, or at least control systems, which I guess are computers at the end of the day, and this is where I think people don't really understand just how automated some of these cars really have gotten. We all kind of look at it and we say, wow, there's a lot of computer screens in my car. Obviously, this thing's got a bunch of computer control, and we just kind of throw it up to that. But I think people maybe, and this is part of why this episode was interesting to me, I don't think people necessarily understand how deep this can go.
Yeah. There's, I think, from what I've seen, there's a pretty huge gap. I think one thing I get a lot, when people are like, oh, what do you do? And I tell them I'm in vehicle security. Vehicle cybersecurity, I should say. I get an eye roll a lot, because it's like, oh man, these viruses and hackers can attack anything now. And, and then they just are like, well, computers are in everything nowadays. And, I think there's a large gap there between people who do understand that there's a cybersecurity aspect and the full-blown cybersecurity professional. A lot of people too who are like, oh yeah, there's vehicle security, really just think of it as key fob. They saw on the news how like people were replicating key fobs and stealing cars or something like that, and they're like, oh yeah, is that what you do? All the way to cybersecurity professionals who are just kind of vaguely aware of vehicle security. And what I get a lot from them is a reference to the infamous 2015 G-Pack, where if those who may not know about the G-Pack, there were 2 very talented individuals who found out they could remotely control 2014 Jeeps. And, there's a big gap between replicating a key fob and taking control of a vehicle over the internet. The idea is bridging that gap. helping people understand all that's in between and all that goes in to get from something as simple as replicating a key fob to something as complex as hacking a car over the internet.
So James actually kind of brought up an interesting point. And I know, Frank, you've got a question out here. I'm getting to you, Frank. We will get back to that question in a minute. But, James brings up an interesting point. The performance circuit, do you even know? I mean, is it the performance circuit that kind of drives some of this? So like MotoGP or, any of those? Or is it consumer markets where things like, emissions and whatever are kind of driving this?
Yeah, I think it's probably while the engine platforms and stuff like that are definitely derived from MotoGP. We all see the V4 engine now in the Ducati Panigale that was used in the Ducati Desmosedici MotoGP bike for decades. So, of course, on the mechanical side, that's huge. But I honestly feel like, kind of like mentioned earlier, that a lot of these electronics are kind of an afterthought for companies like Honda. They make millions and millions of vehicle sales. And and then that kind of bleeds over. I think one aspect I've kind of seen that in is that companies who do not use seasoned electronic system in their recreational vehicles actually often do not have generic diagnostics. So a lot of people may have heard the term OBD2 and stuff like that, which is used for smog checking primarily, and also for third-party, mechanic shops and stuff like that. So you aren't forced to go to the dealer every single time. But what's interesting is that bikes that are not like BMW and Honda, that do not have, a vehicle lineage where these OBD2 requirements are required, or do not use, a platform like Bosch or, any of the other large vehicle controller like Continental and stuff like that, they don't have these diagnostics. They're like, we don't need those, we're just going to have our factory diagnostics stuff. And that's what kind of gives me the idea that this is getting bled over from, the consumer car world versus like the actual performance end of things like MotoGP.
Well, and that's one of the cool things with CAN bus, right? I mean, you can kind of just keep building on it because it's like you said, it's basically a network of its own. And so that's kind of why I was wondering if maybe it's more consumer driving. You mentioned seat heaters and things like that on, and different comfort aspects on some of these bigger bikes, for instance. And that's why it's so important though, too, to understand as a consumer, and, kind of wrapping this back to the whole securing bridges side of things, as a consumer, you're buying, you want all these cool features and stuff. I mean, look how many people are bragging about all the different cool things their Teslas can do and whatever. And it's like, yeah, but understand how that all gets implemented is, this really interesting thing, these connected cars now. And it brings up things like you mentioned, the G-Pack. So with that in mind, I guess I want to address Frank's question now. It seems like a good time. What are the scary things that you find in bikes and cars when you're looking at some of these systems? I mean, what really does this start to turn into besides, hey, we can take control of your car over the internet?
Yeah. I think the scariest thing I've experienced, it's probably not like a scary thing for the general public, but it's just kind of a funny story. What happened to me is one time I was fuzzing the CAN bus network in a vehicle. For those who don't know, fuzzing is just kind of sending random rogue data across the network for all the controllers to see and read, to see how they react. And the car phoned OnStar. And I was scared, and the person on the other line was like, "Hello, we got notification that the vehicle was in a catastrophic accident. Are you okay?" And
Oh no.
and I'm frightened. I'm like, "What do I do?" So I don't. I wonder if the guy on the other end thought I was being held hostage and did it or something, because I'm like, no, I'm fine. Like, and they're like, "Are you sure? Do you need any help?" And I'm just like, no, it was an accident. I'm sorry. And yeah, and I think back and I'm like, man, I wonder if that guy thought I was getting kidnapped because of the way I sounded, and I was like, no, I did it on accident. But
Yeah, how do you explain I did this on accident? I accidentally triggered this. No, the car's totally fine.
Yeah, and so that was definitely the most frightening thing for me. But one of the other things I've seen, there was a vehicle. I can't go into too many details about make and model, of course, and stuff like that.
Sure, right.
But there was a vehicle who I was able to control the steering wheel through the OBD2 sensor. And by, again, fuzzing and sending random data. And what's really weird about this vehicle is that the controller system must have been a crossover from another vehicle, because this car had zero driver assist features. It didn't even have a lane departure warning, and there was no trim model that did have these features. And I think that's probably like a huge other thing that a lot of people don't think of when it comes to security. A lot of people know that the same engine platform is used across, 5 models, or the same chassis is used across a whole bunch of different models. But a lot of people don't really think like, oh, this has the same electronic system as this other vehicle, even though this vehicle doesn't have these features. And, a lot of cybersecurity professionals right now are probably thinking like, ooh, yeah, I want to unlock those features on my car then. But the concern is when there's things like, the fact that you could control a steering wheel on a vehicle that doesn't have any features that even a controller is supposed to be able to control.
Well, what's really interesting to me about that is that not only did it have the controller that was capable of that control, but it actually apparently had the physical elements, whether they're servos or whatever, to actually like implement that, which means somewhere along the way, the only thing preventing you from having that feature on that car is having the user interface to it or something of that nature. Maybe some sensors aren't there or whatever, but that brings up a really interesting point. I know there's a bunch of those like car mod folks out there that I run into all the time with BMW, or like, probably like, oh my God, cool. I want to go see what I can figure out that my car has that I don't know that it has.
Yeah, it's and that's even coming more to light, as you mentioned, with BMW and their seat heaters as a service, or whatever you want to call it, where now we know these things are being implemented, and and they're just behind a paywall. So yeah, that's definitely kind of a car hacker's dream right there, is for you to tell me these things are there and challenge me to to get access to them. But as you mentioned, like the only thing really holding an attacker back in that realm is what I mention a lot is that for decades, vehicles' security platform has been physical access. For the attack we just mentioned, you need to first break into the car, and then you need to plug something at least into the OBD2 port. But as cars begin to come online and have more wireless capabilities, such as, like 90% of vehicles nowadays have Bluetooth connectivity. A lot of them still don't have, internet capability and always connected and stuff like that. But I'd say 99% of vehicles have a Bluetooth connection, which, physical access. If there's a Bluetooth exploit out there, then you don't need physical access. There was actually a Bluetooth exploit, I believe, to one of my bikes, and my bike was I purchased it kind of late in the life of the bike, so I think it was already updated, but they were actually updating the bikes when you would bring them in for their service, which is actually kind of another kind of topic in and of itself is over-the-air updates. Like when we turn on our computer, we're always connected. It's always connected. Same thing with our phone. We're like, oh, there's an update. Click. But a lot of vehicles, motorcycles, and stuff like that, they still don't have over-the-air updates like Tesla does that could just get pushed out to fix. So the idea that people have to go to their local dealer and, stuff like that, it's actually holding people back. I mean, cybersecurity professionals that are watching this probably know well and dear how bad people are at even updating their computer or phone, and stuff like that, and the dangers it plays. But imagine if somebody had to take the time out of their day to go to a dealership to update their computer, how far back that would hold them from updating things.
Well, there's interesting end-of-life concepts here too, right? I mean, so we think in terms of cybersecurity when we think about end-of-life products that can't get updated anymore, and the security implications of what if a vulnerability is found in one of those end-of-life systems. We see that all the time now with cars. So true story. The BMW I own now is the first car I've owned that is connected car with a bunch of the really cool features like what we're talking about here, including the Bluetooth connectivity, internet connectivity, and over-the-air updates. But I know one of the big things for me was a year ago, I had to go research the serial number on my in-car system, the entertainment system that has all the other stuff, because, guess what? Some of them don't support 4G, and 3G networks are going away. And so BMW has stopped updating those. There's no update available. So if you got one of these things, whatever's in that car at the moment is all you got, and you're not getting anything more. And so that was eye-opening to me, because it's like, okay, now wait, all these people, we're used to, people driving around in 1960s, muscle cars and stuff, right? These cars stay on the road forever if you take care of them and do all the things. Now we're getting to the point where there's truly planned obsolescence in cars.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I've seen where vehicles needed updates for more than just standard security purposes too. The first bike I ever owned had to be there was actually a recall on it because the fuel injection was so bad, and it had to be reflashed with a new tune. All of the bikes did. And so imagine something like that happening, or you could go into it's it's definitely something that hasn't really been considered. That the technology in your car could reach end of life, and you're just kind of stuck. It like a lot of sooner or later. I remember the place I see the most end of life computers are actually in CNC shops,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
it's fairly similar. A new CNC machine costs tens of thousands of dollars, and so they have all these Windows XP based CNC machines in there, and sooner or later our highways are going to be like that.
And that's
Because
yeah, and that's what's scary, is yeah. So I will dive into the whole ICS conversation that kind of kicks off in a second. But I do want to get Frank's other question here because I'm actually kind of curious too, to see if you know this. I'm not even sure, but with like these OnStar and all the roadside assistance tools, are they leveraging just cellular phone technology, or is it more that it's IP based over the data connection, or how do these look? Do you know?
yeah, most of the ones that I have seen are like low bandwidth cellular packages that people get. Like if you've shopped around ever for like like to do your own GPS and stuff like that, there's a few like very low bandwidth options out there that you could get, and most of what I've seen for roadside assistance, at least when it comes to like the tracking of the vehicle and the alerts and stuff like that, to OnStar are all over like low bandwidth cellular low cost connections. I don't know so much about when it comes to the actual like audio of communicating. That one mishap was actually the only OnStar experience I had, luckily. But I'd imagine for something like an actual like audio voice connection, you need something a bit more high bandwidth. Most of what I've seen is via cellular right now.
Okay. So going back then, I mean, you mentioned like the CNC machines, and that's, that's the type of concept we think about when we think about any form of ICS, right? It's, a lot of these systems, people buying these big industrial control systems, whatever they are, they're used to those things lasting 10, 12, 15 years or more. I mean, you can walk into factories and stuff and you're going to see factory equipment that has been there for 2 decades. And so now, again, where we start to build in things like controllers that run Windows XP, there doesn't seem to be a good marketplace for, I guess it would almost be like making those universal or something where like you could actually maybe upgrade the controller without having to upgrade the whole machine. Or would that even make sense? Would people even bother? Because it works fine now. Why would I, spend $20,000 to put a new controller on a $2 million CNC machine that works?
Yeah. I don't really know much there. I mean, I know that as we've all seen, if we've ever looked into our own car, in the automotive industry at least, because I've never really ripped apart and looked at the internals of a CNC machine, but in the automotive industry. Yeah, we know that automotive companies will sometimes do their best to monetize situations, and you could have 2 of the exact same controllers that just have different housing on them, so that way like people can't just go buy like a Honda Civic controller and put it in their Honda Accord. They like I myself don't see the car companies being nice enough to be like, oh yeah, come in and get a new controller put on your car and extend its life. But I mean, who knows? Maybe this is a platform for a third party company to do. Like, as we all know, third party engine controller manufacturers have been huge since electronic fuel injection came to be. And so, maybe in the future we'll see where, the body control modules, you could go in and buy a new one. I mean, we kind of already seen that with infotainment centers. Infotainment systems, where you could go and get a whole new infotainment system, get an aftermarket Android Auto system put in your car and stuff like that. And maybe we'll see that more with things like body controllers and all types of weird things where, these third-party companies are coming out and being like, upgrade your car, is your car manufactured between these years? Your controller reached end of life and there's a security threat. That would be a really interesting market to see come to birth, and would even expand, vehicle security even more. When you have these third-party companies that want their stuff pin tested, or maybe they don't, and they're releasing a whole bunch of vulnerable controllers. But
which, unfortunately, from past experience, is probably what would end up happening. But
yeah,
who knows? Maybe not. But no, it's an interesting concept, because even back to what you were talking about before, again, with being able to control the steering wheel via, whatever system that had at least certain components in place. And I'm sure that automakers do that because it's probably like the same, I don't know if it's rack and pinion or what that they're using, but, it's the same components. It's easier to have, you get easier and cheaper. You have the economies of scale if you buy that same steering column or rack, whatever it is that goes in there that has all those elements already in it. Well, it's a lot easier just to do it the same every time, because then you only need one assembly line section for that piece. And so it is interesting to think about, well, how could a third party start to take advantage of that? I mean, I've got the cool little iCarly thing, which first of all, the name makes me laugh because my kids watched that show on Nickelodeon. But, I've got that for my car, and the things that it'll let me do, and things that it'll let me do that BMW would not be happy about. Things that will let me do that I found out I definitely don't want to do because BMW Finance will take my car away from me, but that's another story. But yeah, I did not do that, but I researched and found out that would be bad. But yeah, I mean, so there's been, like you said, that kind of market in that space. So I'm kind of curious, where it's a really neat idea. I'm kind of interested in where that might end up taking us in the future.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I hadn't really thought about until just now either. There are, as smaller companies, continue to manufacture things on a global scale, at least, from what I've seen, it does kind of pose a larger vulnerability threat, versus, these huge companies like Continental and Bosch and stuff like that, that have a much larger reputation, a much larger workforce to make sure that everything that's going out is secure and stuff like that. But when you get these smaller companies out here, manufacturing controllers that may not have the funds to do third-party pen testing, as we've seen, that definitely poses a much larger threat. I mean, like, who knows? I mean, while aftermarket electronic fuel injection systems are very, very popular, I think they aren't necessarily that large of a threat, on something that could be considered a global scale, or it's definitely, but
it's a niche market for sure.
Yeah, the individual threat is definitely there. Like when I went to DEF CON in 2021, and I had a motorcycle there to talk about. One thing I talked about a lot is that's huge with motorcycles and stuff is the tuners. Nearly every person who owns a motorcycle, at some point in time has looked into tuning it, has maybe even flashed a new tune to the controller. And a lot of these folks, do it with a tablet, and they plug in an aftermarket Bluetooth Wi-Fi device, and they, connect to it with their tablet or laptop, and they flash a new tune. And these people aren't really thinking in the realms of security. And after they're done, they're just excited, and they throw their laptop or tablet in their backpack. They keep that device on there that is probably using default credentials, and they go for a cruise down to the cafe. And they get to the cafe, and they hop out, and they pop open their laptop and connect to their bike again and make sure their AFR is looking good, and their tune is going good, and they don't consider that you've exposed with this little cheap device that you bought on Amazon for like $40, and you've left the house with. Some other person at the coffee shop could flash another tune to your bike, and your engine could blow up on the way home. So
and you've hit on exactly why that Carly does not stay plugged into my car all the time, right? It's only when I'm using it because I want to do a mod that I would ever have it plugged in, because I don't trust the damn thing. Because, you can just, and it brings up, oh, God, there's so many parallels now I can think of where this happens. But, so we're getting down to the time we got to wrap this up, unfortunately. But I want to throw one question out there to you, kind of along this vein. If there was one thing that you could say to consumers out there who might be buying motorcycles, cars, airplanes, farm implements, whatever, about it, what they can do to just be a little more secure with all of these connected systems, what would you say to them?
I'd probably first say like user awareness, like for years people have, looked up and went to the dealer to find out if there were any recalls on their vehicles and stuff like that, and I think that, maybe we need a platform separate from the CVEs that's a little bit more user friendly for individuals to look up, vehicle security to get patched at their local dealer or something like that, in the way that we've done it with recalls. So I think user awareness, of course, is a big deal when it comes to knowing that something has been out there. And then I think a base that we just talked on is also like not keeping if your vehicle, if having your vehicle display a wireless connection isn't necessary at that exact time, I would recommend turning it off. Because a huge threat is people plugging in these wireless tuners and just driving around with them nonstop, and people are like, oh yeah, I like to keep mine on there in case my car or bike breaks down. I could just pop open my laptop and see why. But it's not really the best practice. So definitely research third-party utilities before you install them on your vehicle when it comes to electronics. And then if your vehicle doesn't need to be broadcasting a wireless connection, it's probably best to keep it off.
Oh, that's awesome. So I don't know if we're ever going to get manufacturers to listen and educate users on this. I mean, to me, it's something that should be a part of the delivery experience, but that's not fashionable. That's not exciting to tell people, hey, yeah, all these cool features we told you about, turn them off unless you're using them because, oh yeah, they're a security hole. So unfortunately, I think, you and folks like you, myself, got to work to get that message out there. So hopefully this is just one extra way we can do it. With that, thank you so much for jumping on. I really appreciate it. This has been awesome. I think it's probably eye-opening for a lot of our listeners. It's certainly, I learned quite a bit from this discussion today, and I feel like I actually knew quite a bit, but had a lot to learn too. So that's always awesome. Hopefully the folks out there got the same. And to all of you, thank you for joining in. I hope you did enjoy the episode. And we're going to be off actually the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be on the road. So we'll have a 2-week break here where we won't have a new episode, but then we'll come back with more amazing guests. We'll keep doing it as long as you all keep tuning in, watching. If you're out there and you've got an organization that wants to, be a part of this message that we're bringing on Securing Bridges, by all means, let us know. We'd love to partner with you. So with that, gotta let you guys go. It's been a blast. Again, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time here on Securing Bridges.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Securing Bridges podcast with Alyssa Miller. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.